Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Voice of San Diego's Potcast, where we consider cannabis culture and politics in America's finest city and beyond. I'm Jesse Marks, Associate Editor here, and I'm joined by our Engagement Editor, Kinsee Morlan, who covers arts and culture.
Hey guys, so this is a semi-regular endeavor, but we are hoping to do it more consistently. So we got a lot of good feedback on the first episode, so keep that coming. We're looking for your suggestions for topics and guests. Our goal, remember, is to make the brave new world of cannabis accessible to the average person and consider the ways in which cannabis is altering the political and social fabric.
Yeah, so last week, Kinsey, if you may remember, as I'm sure everyone by now knows, we discussed Proposition 64, which was passed in 2016, and it legalized cannabis for recreational use in California. And in the process, it gave municipalities the option to take part or to back out. San Diego has chosen to proceed. There are more than a dozen local dispensaries with permits. Now, the rest of the supply chain, which is the growers, distributors, manufacturers, and testers, they're still getting off the ground. And some are concerned that the process is moving too slowly. So, on this episode, we're going to explore the business side of a legal dispensary. We're going to hear from two San Diego shop owners about what it's like to navigate this unique commercial space. And on the second half of the show, we're going to talk to our friend and colleague Maya. She has a new story about the growing market for California weed in Mexico, and that's going to be great.
It is, but Jesse, I have to tell you something. This is a huge cultural shift, and it's something that I had yet to experience firsthand. So over the weekend, a couple weekends ago, I made my first trek to a legal recreational dispensary.
You did. Congrats.
Yay me. It was actually a New Year's resolution, so only took me a few months to click that one off my list. But I went to, what is it called? The one Urban
Leaf.
Yes. Beautiful.
Yes.
So I tried to go to that one, and the line was so long that I was told I would have to wait anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. People with their medical recommendation cards got, this VIP fast service. The rest of us had to just, wait. And
is there really like a line for people who have their cards, like a shorter one?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Really?
Yeah. So that's something to consider. But I met a lot of nice people, and just the diversity of the people that were there was pretty amazing. One thing that struck me, though, with that first one is like, wow, we're really tucking these in some industrial rundown corners of our city here.
Yeah, it's out of sight, out of mind, right? By design.
Yeah. So I actually my patience ran out, and I ended up driving to a different one, and I went to Harbor Collective in Barrio Logan.
Oh, okay. Haven't been there yet.
Again, it's just, this is a wild area that like nothing else is over there, industrial zone. You have to show your ID. That's about it. And then they let you in. There are security guards that are armed. So if that makes you uncomfortable, like be prepared for that. That's for whatever reason. I see armed guards and I get a little bit nervous,
Yeah, these guys are kind of like rent-a-cops. I guess I shouldn't disparage them, but because some of them are actually former police officers.
Yeah, the one who was working the first dispensary I went to actually was knowledgeable about the whole situation. She's like, Oh, the reason there's a line here is they did another sweep and they closed down all the illegal ones, a bunch of illegal ones.
Oh, yeah.
So they're doing that. They're still working on that. There's lots of illegal ones still up and running, but the police and the sheriffs will close them down when they can. And so they did a big sweep. And so that's actually, she was like, yep, that's why the line is long today.
Yeah. Did you also hear over the weekend that a deliverer was actually shot?
Oh, my goodness. Oh.
Yeah. Well, NBC had a story about that.
All right. So I was also impressed. So you get a little ticket and you go and you wait in the waiting room. And again, there was like lots of tourists from other places being like, oh, we're from Kentucky and they can't believe this is happening.
I was struck by the age difference, right?
Yeah.
So it's people who look like they're maybe 18 and then other people who look like they're in their 80s.
Right. And then, once you go in, I was like, I didn't know what to ask for. I didn't know what to do. And I talked to other mom friends of mine and they're like, well, I don't know what I would say if I went in there. And the person working the counter was very knowledgeable and very nice and let me just be essentially an idiot.
Yeah.
What's the equivalent of like a glass of wine? And so I walked away with like some can of CBD oil. Which is,
Yeah,
I'm a wuss. I'm a baby. It's like I just want, something to make me relax, be a better mom.
So for people who don't know, CBD is it has non-psychoactive compounds.
Yes.
So what is the benefit of it? I'm still sort of up in the air about it because I always hear it come up in conversations about children with seizures.
Yes.
Like, what potentially does an adult get out of CBD?
Well, I will have to report back to you on the next podcast episode because I've only tried it a couple times and I've been so scared I do half a drop and nothing happens. So,
all right, I'm gonna hold you to that next time.
And then there's some other big. One more thing. So I got the bag, which they put it in this little white medical bag, which it took me hours to figure out how to open up. It's childproof.
Oh yeah, mm-hmm.
And I am apparently a child. So I get this bag and I drive off and I take a wrong turn and I immediately end up on a military base with my drugs that are, illegal there, right? Kind of. So, yay me.
Good job, Kinsee.
I did it.
I am proud of you for going, though.
So, yeah, other big news in the world of weed, Jesse, is with weed maps. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so that's interesting. A couple of months ago, Chris Cate, city council member in San Diego, made a big deal about stepping up the enforcement efforts of independent deliverers. He specifically targeted weed maps and said, hey, you're allowing illegal operations to essentially advertise, and we're trying to keep this system fair and regulated. It went nowhere in San Diego, but it came out last week that a couple of weeks ago, the California Bureau of Cannabis Control has actually started sending letters to Weed Maps, its parent company, basically asking them to fix their website, to get rid of any illegal operations on there. And I also have evidence that they've started sending letters to independent deliverers through text messages to people who've been advertising online, which is sort of a new dynamic.
Independent deliverers do not advertise on weed maps, but they advertise, or do they do both? They
could. So if you're not licensed through a dispensary to do it, you could advertise wherever you want, theoretically, right?
Right. Okay.
But so here's the contention, though, is that Weed Maps says they're not allowing necessarily advertising for these independent deliverers, that their website is just basically, it's like a sort of crowdsourced media site. They say that people are just sort of uploading content to their website, and what they do with it is none of their business. So Weed Maps kind of sees itself more as a media company, and it could potentially try to shield itself from liability in that sense. But I think the point is, regulators are getting serious now, and they're starting to drop the hammer, and they're starting to threaten companies which don't want to play ball. According to the law in California, if you do advertise for marijuana services, you have to actually cite your license number. So that's kind of the way that they're going to step up enforcement.
Yeah, I get that, but also there's nothing stopping these illegal dispensaries from going on Instagram, going on Facebook, going on Twitter, using these hashtags. In San Diego, there's myriad hashtags that will lead you to a dispensary or any sort of cannabis culture things that you need. I kind of, maybe it'll make an impact, but I doubt it. They'll figure out ways to advertise themselves, right?
I think you're right. I think if there's a will, there's a way, honestly. And one thing that we've reported on, we've been talking about for a while, is that the black market is just so big, it's going to find a way to keep doing its thing. But at the same time, I don't blame the regulators, right? They're kind of frustrated because they've gone through all this work and this big process, and now they feel like people are just going around them.
That's right. So one last bit of news in the wild world of cannabis in San Diego region comes out of my hometown of Lemon Grove. We had a councilman there who was accused of assaulting a man who has been trying to open up 3 medical marijuana dispensaries. It was first written about in the Reader and followed up by a longer, more in-depth article in the Union Tribune. I thought that I still have more questions about this case. What do you think?
Yeah. I actually, it was a fine story, but I read it and I had a million questions afterwards. So it's not clear to me what exactly happened. But
there was a mayor and a councilman at a house.
And in July of last year, they had some discussion, right? Late at night at a council member's house, somebody invited this marijuana dispensary applicant. Apparently, he wanted to talk about his application and delays in the process, and the city council member didn't want to talk about it. Unfortunately, at this point, though, it's a he said sort of thing.
Yeah.
But what we ultimately know is that a fight broke out at some point, and there are pictures of the fight.
Yes.
And now there's a lawsuit stemming from that. But we don't really know concretely what else happened. And it's curious to me why law enforcement really didn't step into this, right? Because it sounds like the council member didn't report it to law enforcement. And Christopher Williams, the applicant, later said that he just didn't feel like he didn't want to press charges, right?
Right. He was afraid of repercussions, like how the city would, react to that in the beginning. Yeah.
But I mean, this took more than 6 months to come out, and now we're talking about a potential federal civil rights lawsuit. It's
very odd. It's something to keep an eye on for sure.
Sure.
All right, well, let's get to those interviews.
All right, everyone, welcome back. We're joined by Rocky Goyal, who founded the Apothecary stores in Kearny Mesa and Mission Valley. Although I think the Kearny Mesa store is closed. You might have to tell us more about that in a sec.
Sure.
And we're also joined by Alex Scherer. He founded the Southwest Patient Group and the United Medical Marijuana Coalition, which is a trade group that has been lobbying for cannabis ordinances. Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having us.
So let's start off with some basics. I wanted to figure out whether you guys are true cannabis believers or whether you're simple entrepreneurs, and those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive by any means. But I think there's a spectrum of activity in the cannabis community. So can you just one by one, just take us into why you got into marijuana, the business, and considering all of the huge risks and the financial costs, why not go into any other type of business? I guess we'll start with you, Rocky.
It's a great question. So for me, I look at it both ways. And what initially kind of piqued my interest was my mom had suffered a stroke, and she's also suffering from cancer, and she was taking Ambien. And the Ambien was making her do a lot of goofy stuff. She would call me in the middle of the night and then not remember the conversation, or she'd call me the next day and say, hey, I sleep drove my car and filled up the car with gas, and I had no idea when I woke up in the morning. I'm like, man, that's crazy stuff. Yeah. And a pharmacist buddy of mine was kind of dabbling in cannabis and doing some extracts, and he developed these pills. I gave them to my mom. She stopped taking Ambien, and she had no idea she was getting high at night, but she didn't need the Ambien. And I was like, there's something to this. And then what started out, and so my mom is this conservative Indian lady, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, doesn't eat meat, right? So it's funny that she's taking these pills. So what happened was she's telling her friends, she's telling her mother, my grandmother. So I'm getting these phone calls. Hey, what are these pills you gave your mom? I'd like to get some. And so I'm like, okay, slow down, guys. I'm not a drug dealer. This isn't what I do, but I started looking into it. And so then I started thinking more about it. And that's what piqued my interest. My background is commercial real estate. So I do development, investments, construction. And I figured out that the cannabis game is more about land use and real estate than it is actually operational. So I kind of attacked it from that perspective, started to find some success, and then started to bring in people to help me operate because I didn't know a lot about cannabis, and kind of look at it both ways. It piqued my interest that it was actually helping people, and then I saw that I could be successful at it. And I like to think that we are successful now, and looking back, it kind of the formula works really well.
What about you, Alex? Why not sell anything else? Why cannabis?
Well, I find several different reasons to be satisfied with what I'm doing. I've been a cannabis smoker since I was in high school. I kind of aligned with cannabis more than drinking. I was into sports, and my first career work was mortgages and real estate. I was into that, and that market crashed. And I started seeing that there was some opportunity in the cannabis space, and doing it now, I find a lot of satisfaction working with customers that find a lot of relief in what cannabis is doing. I also look at it from a social justice perspective. Cannabis has impacted communities of color disproportionately from others, and now that it's legalized, I'm hoping to see a lot of relief for those communities. So overall, it's just, an exciting thing to be a part of.
All right. So most of the dispensaries in the city of San Diego are pushed into these ratty industrial zones. they're basically out of sight, out of mind by design. But that's really not the case for both of you guys. Alex, your dispensary is in a shopping mall. What kinds of challenges, you already mentioned the land use navigation that you've had to do. So what kind of challenges did you encounter when you were looking for a location? There were city zoning regulations to consider, but also state environmental laws. So talk to us about that.
So, yeah, really good point. The city of San Diego, when they decided that they wanted this use and they started thinking about where they wanted this, they stuck it out in these far-flung areas. They made the zoning so restrictive. It actually, if you look at the zoning and all the different restrictions, it almost identically matches adult entertainment uses. So I took a step back and I looked at that. And I thought, okay, so society is lumping this use in the same category as adult entertainment. Cool, got it.
It's still the prohibitionist era in some people's minds.
It
right?
absolutely is. And I looked at it, I was like, man, this should be near pharmacies, hospitals, medical office buildings. That's where I thought instinctively that people would want to place it. And we're still far away, I think, from getting there.
Yeah.
But that made it extremely challenging, of course, because you don't have a lot of areas where property meets those requirements.
Right.
Then you factor in all these sensitive use requirements. So, for example, you can't be within 1,000 feet of churches, schools, parks, playgrounds, minor-oriented facilities, which for a time could mean a small karate dojo in a giant strip mall. And that would be enough to disqualify you. And later they kind of figured out that's not fair, and so they kind of redefined that. That made it a little easier, but nonetheless, it still made it, for the first year, extremely challenging. And if you look at it now, there's a max of 36 allowed in the city of San Diego. It's a 4 cap per district, 9 districts, but we'll never see more than 20 because there's just not any property available that meet those requirements.
Yeah, there's some districts that have none at all, and we'll probably never have any, right?
Unless they loosen things up, yeah.
Yeah. So what about you, Alex? You're kind of in the middle of a shopping mall, right? It's got to be a unique spot to be.
It's a little plaza down in the border community, San Isidro. It was just very difficult to find properties that meet all those requirements. And we understood the city was trying to be very cautious when they created the ordinance. It was something that they wanted to sort of introduce gently into the community. There was still a lot of people very concerned about the use being a very new thing. So we kind of understood it. It was very challenging, but we ended up finding one that qualified down there. And we've found now that the communities, once they see what we're doing, they're very receptive to it. We have great relationships with our neighbors, with the Chamber of Commerce across the street from us. So hopefully in the future, you'll find dispensaries in areas more accessible to communities and neighborhoods.
So tell us, too, about the staffing and hiring process. I'm sure some of your candidates come with a background in the black market, maybe others come from the medical marijuana world. What were you looking for in these people who run your business?
I felt like for us, we actually preferred people that didn't have cannabis experience, that were coming from more retail-focused backgrounds. So people who worked in customer service at like Best Buy, Verizon, people that had those skills, can be trained to learn about cannabis. But really, this is now becoming a more customer-focused business, right? With recreational having opened up, people are coming out trying cannabis for the first time. So it's not that model anymore of, hey, you have to be a cannabis user to be able to work in a dispensary. And for me, like I said, I actually prefer not to, because I think people connect better when it's when you have staff and folks that come from more of that legitimate background. Mm-hmm. And people want to feel like, just like you, if you were to walk into at the mall and go to a store, it's more about customer service than it is somebody being really educated on the chocolates you're buying, at Godiva or See's Candy. But so that's kind of our philosophy.
Okay. Same for you, Alex, or?
It is heavily customer service focused. I mean, we're looking for genuinely good people. The cannabis industry has, in the past, with workers, created a lot of bad habits. The fact that a lot of these operations were illegal, there was a lot of just bad business practices that have been in place. So We do look for people that have cannabis experience because there is a lot of education and knowledge that the consumers want. So it helps if they have a familiarity with the products and the brands and so forth. But everyone, as business owners, we prioritize education of our bud tenders because there's a lot more information that needs to be given to consumers now regarding testing, regarding processes for manufacturing, cultivation, and all that. So
Yeah.
So actually, to Alex's point, what we're seeing now is a lot of vendors are coming in doing educational days for staff. So staff is getting this
Lunch and learns.
Absolutely.
Yay.
Yeah, it is. It is. And in fact, everybody loves it. Cause even I love it because I can come in and grab a sandwich and learn something myself too.
Awesome.
But yeah, so we're seeing that actually is a win-win for the vendor and the patient and the staff because that extra education just helps everybody, right? I mean, one of the biggest issues we've seen is this overdosing problem, right? People who are coming in, haven't tried cannabis before, they're trying an edible. They don't know their dose. They're taking maybe just a few extra milligrams than they should.
And they freak out.
It's
It's like a Marine Dowd experience.
Hey, we've all been there, okay?
and the thing is, like, nothing bad happens. You kind of just ride it out.
You just think you're dying.
Well, you're calling 911 and you're saying, get me unstoned. And there's not much you can do for it. But the downside is the next day, you're telling your friends, you're telling your family, hey, I tried this cannabis thing and it's
terrible.
It doesn't work. Yeah. And that's not good for anybody.
Right. That makes sense.
So let's talk the financials for a second, because you guys work in basically an all cash business, right? It's gotta be difficult not having a traditional banking system. And I've heard some dispensary owners complain about getting taxed multiple times on the same dollar. So can you help us break down and for our listeners specifically, like to walk us through? I'm going to get really detailed here, but IRS Section 280E, like walk us through some of the difficulties that you have, you're going to have filing taxes and like keeping your business afloat. Like financially, what is it like right now?
Well, that's
a wonky question.
Well, it's somewhat of a sensitive topic too, right? There's not a lot of people that like to talk about it because everybody tackles this issue a little differently.
Okay.
Cash is a problem, and it creates risk for everybody. All those involved. City of San Diego has done a really great job with the security requirements, between the bulletproofing, the cameras, the guards. So it is safe. I tell people that if somebody were to want to rob us, they'd have a better chance hitting a 7-Eleven than they would trying to get a dispensary in this day and age. It's going to end really badly if you try to go down that path.
Yeah.
280E is definitely a huge challenge, and I will tell you that. As a business guy looking at this industry, I had no idea the real impact of 280E until I got into this thing. I've filed 2 tax returns now, having been in this thing for 2 years, and the money and the math, the return on investment isn't what I thought at all. It's not horrible, but it's not what people think. Cash isn't falling from the sky.
You're not like sleeping on a mattress of cash.
I am not rolling around in money.
Swimming in it.
Yeah, piles of it everywhere. Nothing even close to that. And frankly, it's a lot less than most legitimate retail businesses. I think restaurant businesses have higher margins. I think laundromats are probably going to be a better return on your investment than a cannabis dispensary.
Are you in this for the long haul, or is this like a gold medallion thing in New York where it's like you buy it, you invest in it, and then you try to sell it off at a later date?
My thought on it is that this is going to eventually turn into somewhat of a corner liquor store model, right? As more municipalities come online, everybody wants the tax revenue. You're not going to see just 15 or 20 of these like you do today, right? And if you think about who's coming online, La Mesa, Lemon Grove, Chula Vista, right? Oceanside's talking about it. Vista's talking about it. It wouldn't surprise me if you see 75 to 100 dispensaries throughout the county over the next few years.
Sure.
So in a way, it is kind of like a medallion, but I also think that we're going to get some stabilization and saturation, and everybody's going to do okay, but it's not what it is now, and it's definitely not what it was like 2, 3, 5 years ago. Some of these stores were, I can't even tell you some of these gross revenue numbers that blow your socks off, but they rival, if not exceed, a cheesecake factory or a yard house in terms of annual gross revenue. So we're talking big numbers, but I don't see that being sustainable. And if you look at what's happened in Colorado and some of the more mature markets, history is going to repeat itself here too. I think some of that gets softened with things like tourism, right, and population growth, but ultimately I don't see it being sustainable.
And Alex, how are you handling these this cash issue? I mean, do you pay employees in all cash?
We pay employees in all cash.
Okay.
We pay our payroll taxes in all cash. We make workers' comp payments. Everything is basically cash. And then
they file their own taxes, right? Like they're expected, like a contractor would.
Correct.
Okay.
No. I'm sorry. Our employees are W-2'd. So
Okay.
we deduct the payroll taxes and provide them the net in cash.
Got it.
So it is challenging, and there's costs to operating in cash that you wouldn't need to deal with if you had a bank account. There's premiums for our industry. Workers' comp is higher, insurances are higher, product liability insurance is higher. So aside from not being able to write off payroll, marketing, rent, anything that a typical business is able to write off, we also have premiums on all the other services that we have to deal with because cannabis industry is considered high risk still.
Right.
So it's exactly what Rocky is saying. It's not quite the fantasy a lot of people think it is. It's very challenging, but at the same time, it's very rewarding.
So it requires a lot of capital up front, and I think you guys have made that point clear. But I'm curious that seems to fuel the perception among the activist crowd that it's like the corporations are taking over and corporate types are taking over. But it sounds like that's a necessity. Like you have to have a lot of capital to get into this business. What do you guys make of that perception and that criticism that you sometimes hear from like the sort of the activist crowd?
Well, I used to be one of those.
For the record, neither of them are wearing suits and ties. So.
This is true.
And to a degree, I still am, but there is a certain reality to operating under these regulations. There's serious costs to the land use requirements that the city laid out, to the oversight that the state has with testing, with just track and trace of the products from seed to sale. All those things are very expensive, and so it takes capital and it takes a sophisticated operation to be able to operate in this environment. So
Right.
It's not something that just anybody can do.
So in your daily legal calculations, where does the federal government factor in? We're only a few miles from the border. Alex, you're just a few feet from the border. And the U.S. Attorney General has made not so veiled threats against legal cannabis markets. So question, do you have your lawyers on speed dial?
I do, for just a number of reasons, because so many different laws coming into play that we just are in touch regularly. But generally I'm not too terrified about it. We take it very seriously, obviously.
Sure.
But I think so long as we are doing our best and abiding by the rules and performing well, the evidence is showing that this isn't necessarily hurting neighborhoods, isn't necessarily having a negative impact on public safety. And I think there's more important things for the federal government to be focused on than chasing down operations like us.
Sure.
I'm not so comfortable with it as Alex is. I think about it every day. I think about it when I wake up. I think about it when I go to sleep. My background is, legitimate kind of commercial real estate, and I've got tenants and properties and assets, and I deal with banks and so for me, I've got I don't want to say more to lose, but certainly, a lot of people relying on me, other investors, friends, family that I do projects and deals with, and so it becomes a real concern. It's tough. It's really tough. I think politically the winds have changed enough where I have comfort continuing, but obviously you'd like to see something come from the federal government where you feel a little bit better about it. So I'm still very torn as I move forward, how I want to proceed, and things like this interview, for example, my name is going to get attached to it. It may be it's online, and God forbid down the road somebody wants to search me and my name, it's a bank or somebody that I'm applying for a loan for on a different project that has nothing to do with cannabis, and they see that, I'm going to get denied that loan on that project.
Sorry. Just kidding.
No. And look, I'm not trying to make it feel dark and somber, but those are the things that I think about and that really weigh heavily on me. And I've got a family, I've got children, and so it is something that's it's
it weighs heavily on customers and consumers too. That federal disconnect is still something that is keeping people from maybe checking out a dispensary, I think. So.
No question.
Let's talk a little bit more locally. So July 1st is a pretty significant date coming up, right? Because that's when some of the tougher labeling restrictions come into place. Like some of the tougher supply chain restrictions are going to come in place. What does the summer look like for you guys? Do you think it's going to be smooth, or do you think that some of the fears of there being a shortage of supply are warranted? Like what should we expect for the summer?
It's a good question. Honestly, I'm not spending a lot of time thinking about it, and here's why. Because I feel like all the rules that are in place, we're trying to abide by them now. So for me, looking at July 1, I don't know that too much changes operationally for us. Now, you have a good point in that, do some of the suppliers disappear? And I think they do. I think a lot of them already have. I think people are not looking at this saying, hey, I have a few more months of runway. Let me continue to operate illegally, hoping to figure this out. We've seen a lot of people just disappear. So I think a lot of that impact has already happened. My hope is that the additional time actually lets people figure out licensing, get kind of up and running compliantly, so that maybe we can see a little bit more variety and more options on the shelf.
I've heard the state's been pretty slow to okay some of those permits so far, right? I mean, I guess like in San Diego at the moment, like who are you buying from? Like what does it look like? There's
a handful of licensed manufacturers, distributors throughout the state, and they've made their way down here. Okay. My name and my phone number is on our state application, and I get 2 to 3 calls a day from somebody that's a licensed whatever and wants to come in and show and demo. So it's out there. I'm probably not answering the calls as much as I should because it's just it's tough. But
yeah.
So you sort of mentioned this already, but you do think there's still illegal dispensaries up and running in East County and the county, which has put a ban on marijuana dispensaries for a while. And also there's all these independent deliverers that are still operating outside of the legal market, at least in the city of San Diego. Do you think it'll be better if we just regulate, like figure out, open it up to more people and bring them into the fold rather than continue this black market, allowing these black market businesses, the deliveries and the dispensaries?
That's a good question. I feel pretty strongly about this one. I think that generally more access is good, but it has to be done the right way. So, you talk about illegal deliveries, right? Most of these guys are running around like essentially ice cream trucks where their inventory's in their car and they just go from address to address and walk in with a suitcase, or in some cases I've seen a pizza case very creatively come into somebody's home, and it opens up, and in it is a variety of stuff to choose from. The reason why I really don't like that is, City of San Diego and most municipalities, for good reason, have said, hey, this is somewhat of a dangerous, risky activity. It should be contained in a secure location, away from schools and churches. There should be guards. There should be cameras. And that set of criteria should apply to stores and delivery services. What's the difference between a store and a delivery? They still have to keep product. They have to keep cash.
True.
There's people processing product, right? And so all those same concerns you have apply to delivery, right?
Yeah,
So if we agree on that, then we should also agree that they have to go through the same things that the stores have to go through. So if as a society we can agree on that and make them go through all those same things, then yeah, I'm a big supporter of that, because now it's being done right. It's following the laws and the criteria that society has said is appropriate here. But to allow these guys to nilly-willy drive around town and operate out of their garages, no, absolutely not. I mean, I can't support that at all.
Alex?
The access that certain communities have right now is lacking. It would be valuable if some of the areas that have bans revisited their policies, because there's a lot of benefit to allowing that in terms of the cost of enforcement, in terms of improving public safety. So generally, we're supportive of that, but it takes civic engagement. People need to engage their politicians, their local governments, and communicate the needs and how this could be done properly. So generally, delivery services, I agree with Rocky, are really no different than a storefront in terms of the rules that they need to abide by, and it can be very challenging. We're doing our best, I think, right now to reach those communities and neighborhoods, because we have delivery operations ourselves as stores.
Okay.
The city of San Diego allows that from our store. So moving forward, we fully expect the markets to open up and more communities to have these types of operations in there.
So I think you guys make a good point, and you're able to actually make deliveries, right, through San Diego's system that they've established. So it's the independent deliverers that you're arguing against. It seems like Chula Vista, though, has actually taken on the idea that you put forward a second ago, Rocky, because they would force or they would require independent deliverers to still have a storefront. It's just not open to the public.
Yeah.
So are you okay with something like that?
Absolutely, because that to me is fitting the same rules as storefronts, except they're just saying you can't have walk-in traffic, but you got to be in a secure location, in the right zone, with the right security measures. That's the way it should be. So if they're doing that and following that, I think that is the way we want it, and that's safe for everybody. And I would support that.
So if I were an independent deliverer right now, I would say to you, but you have a financial incentive to keep me out of the marketplace. What do you say to some of the independent deliverers who feel like they've been unfairly kind of kept out of this marketplace?
Well, I would actually flip it the other way, and I'd say, you're not paying taxes. You don't have the same cost structure I do, so you're charging lower prices. You're essentially illegal. You're putting yourself, your employees at risk. Wherever you're operating your business out of, it's probably not fair to your neighbors. So who's the bad guy here? Is it me or is it you?
We were talking actually before you guys came in. A deliverer just got shot a couple of days ago too, somewhere in North Park. NBC had a story about it this weekend, so it's definitely a dangerous game still.
Yeah, the people that target businesses like this, they understand that it's not comfortable for a delivery service to call police when they're operating illegally, because it puts them on the radar. So it's an unfortunate situation. It's sad to see people getting hurt doing this, because it's a consequence of government policy and just the way things are right now.
And Rocky, I don't want to leave our listeners hanging. Did we ever touch on why the Kearny Mesa dispensary is closed?
The Kearny Mesa dispensary changed hands.
Oh.
We sold that asset and building to a group out of Los Angeles.
Okay.
And so
you just got an offer you couldn't refuse?
I got an offer I couldn't refuse, and
sounds shady.
No.
It's just business.
You're not helping.
No, I know. As soon as I said that, but look, you guys understand and see that this is something everybody's looking to get into, right? From my own grandparents and cousins calling me, hey, here's some money, can I get in on this? So this group out of LA has raised some money taking that approach, and they're out there trying to buy their way into the market, and they're willing to pay premiums to get beachfront property, and that's kind of what we had up in Kearny Mesa, was beachfront cannabis property. And for me, I looked at it as, I knew that an exit is going to come for everybody. Mm-hmm. If and when they want to take it.
Sure.
I just didn't expect it to come that quickly, and it came quickly, and it came for us. So, at the end of the day, I'm still a businessman. I look at it like that. So, if somebody was willing to pay a premium, and hey, let's talk. Give me a call, guys, if anybody else is out there.
Alex, you mentioned a second ago, I want to follow up on this about sort of the political aspect of everything. It's an election year. Are you guys going in for any candidates specifically? I've seen ACP endorsing certain candidates and sending out press releases for certain forums. Where do you guys fall on the political spectrum this year?
That's a fascinating question. I've never seen so many candidates ever in my life want to turn to the cannabis industry for support. It's really astounding.
I saw a Missouri senator was in town raising money through cannabis businesses.
I'm getting calls from all kinds of people saying, hey, we want to get in front of the UMMC. We want to get in front of, I'm also a part of a group called SDCIA, San Diego Cannabis Industry Association. It's kind of like a chamber of commerce for cannabis here in San Diego. And people see it. People see the support. They see the money, and they're coming out. And it's not just Democrats. It's Republicans, too. So I think it's great. Right, I think it's a sign of the times. It comes back to that comment I made about political winds are shifting. Mm-hmm. As far as any specific candidates, I couldn't tell you. How can you support somebody when you don't really know them? And they want to come and chat and say they support cannabis, but for me, I can't just say, hey, that's your guy, because I got to get to know you before I say I want to support you. I can't just support somebody because of a couple of statements they make. So I'm not a political guy. Maybe that's the wrong thing to say, but that's kind of my perspective on it.
Rocky, how about you? Are you really into any of the candidates?
Alex.
Oh, sorry, Alex.
We're definitely paying attention. It's an important issue to voters. For some reason, it always ends up being a major question that people have of candidates is their position on cannabis. And for us as a business, it's important to us that we have politicians that are smart and receptive to what we're doing. It impacts a whole array of other issues. So I'm definitely keeping my eye out. I'm looking at who would be favorable to what we're doing.
Would that be the DA's race, the sheriff's race specifically? Like which one of those races is foremost on your minds?
The DA's race, I think, is very important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with Alex. I think, they have jurisdiction here in the city of San Diego, so they do impact what we're doing. It's something that, historically has not been an office that has been supportive of this industry. So to see a change in perspective there is welcoming. I think also as you look at I'm trying to think, even in the city of San Diego, we've got some turnover coming. Right? Isn't there?
Yep, city council.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so to continue to see their support is going to be important. Thus far, they've been great, right? If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, we want to see that. I think in terms of the sheriff and more county supervisors, that doesn't directly impact us here in city of San Diego. Unless you're actually chasing opportunity in the county, then you have some vested interest there. But city of San Diego dispensaries don't really have a say in county supervisor. Don't really care. It doesn't really impact us.
Right. All right. Well, we could talk about this for a long time, but Alex, Rocky, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you
for having us.
Thanks, guys.
This was great.
All right. Stay tuned, listeners. In the second half of the Voice of San Diego podcast, we talked to one of our own, Maya, about her reporting.
Hey everyone, welcome back. We're excited to talk now with Maya Srikrishnan, a fellow journalist here at Voice of San Diego. She just published a fascinating article about California's pot and its cultural influence over the border, and how potentially that is changing the politics over there. And it seems like people are not necessarily actually smuggling marijuana into Mexico in a particularly sophisticated manner, as Maya reported. Actually, they're just driving it across the border.
It's so easy,
It's amazing.
Is what it seems like, and it's been happening for quite a while, actually.
So is that still the case? They're not really stopping every car, and when they do stop cars, they're just not looking for the new types of marijuana that people are buying in California, right?
Yeah, so there are two things. One is that when you're driving southbound, you're less likely to get stopped than when you're coming, into the U.S., and so the chances of you getting stopped are less. And then from what I understand from the people who I spoke with, they say that some of the Mexican customs authorities, they aren't really looking for some of the oils and edibles, and some of the more sophisticated products are kind of still looking for your typical joint, which not as many people are using anymore, nor is that what people are bringing back.
Right. So just to be clear, weed is still illegal in Mexico, but there is this increasing pressure to legalize it. Maya, paint the picture for us, what it's like there. Explain what's going on in Tijuana and other parts of northern Mexico right now, and what's behind this push to legalize marijuana there?
Well, so if there's any push that's happening in Mexico, it's for medical marijuana at this point, not really for recreational. The Minister of Tourism said back in January that he was proposing legalizing marijuana in places where a lot of American tourists go. So Los Cabos, it's at the southern tip of Baja California Peninsula, and then in Cancun and Quintana Roo.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, we're really just talking about medical marijuana. And so, I mean, marijuana in general and most cannabis forms are not legal in Mexico. If you get a doctor's prescription and a special import permit from the Mexican Health Department, you can import CBD products and products with less than 1% THC.
Okay.
So that has kind of been happening, but from my understanding, it's only a few hundred families who are actually participating in kind of that importation. And then in Tijuana, you can technically, if you have a doctor's prescription from Mexico, you can bring products from San Diego or California back into Mexico without that special import permit because you're bringing it back yourself. But again, it has to be a CBD product or have 1% THC or less.
Right.
And then the other thing in Mexico is that they actually decriminalized a certain amount of marijuana back in 2009.
Oh.
So for personal use, you can kind of get caught with it. And under the law, it's supposed to be decriminalized, but there's also some caveats where police can still take you in to question you to make sure you're not part of kind of any criminal sort of organization or anything like that. So in practice, it kind of doesn't work out the same way it would here necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you found that there are actually a good number, an increasing number of Mexican tourists coming to the United States and buying our fancy marijuana. Is that right? Like, what are the numbers?
Well, so it's really hard to get a comprehensive data picture for this kind of thing, especially because a lot of the transportation between California and Mexico marijuana is illicit.
Right.
But I did talk to Southwest Patient Group, which is a dispensary that is right on the border. It's literally walking distance away from the border crossing in San Isidro.
Mm-hmm.
And it's owned by Latinos, and they have Spanish-speaking staff, which is not the case in most dispensaries in San Diego. But they said that of the roughly 200 clients that they get every day, probably 15 to 20 are from Mexico. And they also said that they are kind of participating in more tourism endeavors when it comes to marijuana.
Okay.
Not just for people from Mexico, but from all over the world to kind of show them what they've been doing. And that's something that now that the rules for recreational marijuana are kind of in place in San Diego, that a lot of the owners are turning their attention to.
Interesting. And you talked to a PhD student in your piece that sort of described the typical Mexican tourist who's buying marijuana in California. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so I spoke with a PhD student at COLEF who has been studying this kind of trans-border marijuana phenomena for a while. And he's been talking to kind of dozens of people who have been buying marijuana in San Diego long before recreational pot was legal and bringing it back to Tijuana. And one of the things that he found was that the majority of these people are kind of middle or upper class Tijuanenses. Oftentimes they might be U.S. citizens or have visas because there's a couple of things that they need. They need to be able to cross the border with ease.
Mm-hmm.
So that requires some sort of paperwork. The other thing is that California marijuana is a lot more expensive than what you would be able to get in Mexico.
Right.
So they need to have a sort of higher economic
And
threshold.
that money.
Yeah. In that sense. And then they're also just kind of more discerning customers. So they kind of are more concerned about the quality of their marijuana, like the different compositions of it, the products, and where it comes from.
Yeah, so we sort of touched on this a second ago about California marijuana being a better product, right? Or at least I imagine it's a better product. But you also wrote in your piece, Maya, that there's a benefit to buying bloodless marijuana. What exactly did you mean by that? Help us break down that concept.
Well, I mean, as everyone should know, Mexico has been dealing with issues and violence from the illicit drug trade for many, many years now, and hundreds of thousands of people have lost their lives over it. And even in Tijuana, there's a lot of fighting and homicides every single week over, between cartels and caused by this drug trade. And so now when people are starting to shift their views about marijuana, it's really important to them that they are not participating in that sort of industry. And so I think one of the things that these consumers like about California marijuana is that they can track where it comes from. They don't see it as associated with the violence and the crime that they've kind of been dealing with for such a long time.
Also in your story, you already mentioned that there is a legal path to selling CBD products if you get a medical or note and all that sort of stuff. And there's actually a local company here in Poway who's involved in this effort, and they have been lobbying the state because that's the only way to legalize
the federal government. Yeah.
Right, the federal government. Sorry. So tell us more about that Poway company and their lobbying efforts.
So the company is Medical Marijuana Inc., and they are actually the only publicly traded marijuana company in the U.S. In addition to that, and they are working in several other countries. But so a couple of years ago, there was a really famous Supreme Court case in Mexico where there was an 8-year-old girl who was having really bad epileptic seizures, and her parents were trying to get her permission to use CBD products to help, and they were allowed to. And then the health department kind of said, all right, if you can find a company that will create this CBD only product that fits all of our restrictions, then we will let you import this. And so basically, the father of that girl and a lot of other families who were kind of in similar situations went knocking on doors of several companies in the U.S. and doing a lot of online research, trying to figure out where we can get a CBD only product that fits all these regulations that we can, get permitted in Mexico. And they ended up finding it at Medical Marijuana Inc. And since then, the company has started its own Mexican subsidiary, HepMeds Mexico, which has been right now primarily involved in education and lobbying and advocacy. And last year, Mexico passed its first medical marijuana regulations, so now they're allowed to import up to 1% THC, which before they weren't. The regulations still haven't been put out in final draft form. But as of now, that company basically has exclusive rights to any Mexican who qualifies for medical cannabis products, but can't just cross the border and get it. So if they have to import it, they can only get it from this company. And the company has been, lobbying and in touch with a lot of the politicians to try and push for further regulation.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are the odds of Tijuana having its own legal regulatory system of shops and growers anytime soon? Did you get any sense of a timeline?
Probably not for a while. I mean, as you can see, kind of federally, things are happening really, really slowly. So a few years ago, they allowed CBD-only products. Now they're allowing 1% THC, and that's still, even for medical purposes, that's still really limited because to treat certain things, you need different compositions of cannabis.
Right.
Recreational is probably even further off. So this is probably several years down the line.
Right.
And even now, when you look at the numbers, marijuana use and attitudes about marijuana in Mexico are still, they're still really low in comparison to other countries. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's kind of a very Catholic country, and then also because of, the drug war that's been going on there. So now you still only see maybe 12% of people have tried marijuana in national surveys. So it's still not a lot. So it's probably a really slow thing coming.
Right.
It's happening poco a poco.
Yeah. Well, awesome work. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks
Appreciate
for having me.
Yeah. And guys, that's it for us for this episode. Thanks for listening. Please email me with any ideas for future topics or for guests. That's jesse@vosd.org.
And if you like the show or anything we do here at Voices San Diego, head over to our website and click the donate button.